as BTS's Jungkook touched down in the United States for an undisclosed schedule, rumored to include a secret concert and a guest appearance on The Tonight Show. What should have been a moment of quiet anticipation quickly turned into a scene of concern and chaos. Amid growing fears of sightseeing interference and crowding at the airport, one voice stood out in the shadows of it all: Jins. The eldest BTS member, Kim Seokjin, may still be recovering from his military discharge, but his role as Big Brother never rests. According to multiple insiders and staff close to both idols, Jin was anxiously tracking Jungkook's flight in real time, staying awake until the moment he landed. And when Jungkook finally stepped onto US soil, Jin sent a short but powerful message that has now gone viral. "Text me the second you feel something's off. Don't hesitate. I'll always answer." Sources say Jungkook read the message as he walked off the jet bridge and immediately replied with a heart emoji and "I'm here, Hyung. It's a little crazy already." It was then that security tightened drastically around him. Chaotic arrival raises, security red flags. Though his schedule was never officially released, dozens of people appeared at the airport terminal just minutes before Jungkook's arrival. Screaming fans, zoom lenses, and multiple sightseeing photographers were spotted near the restricted arrival area. Social media was quickly flooded with photos and videos that appeared to breach privacy protocols. One fan page even posted a close-up of Jungkook's face before he had officially exited the airport gate, causing concern over how that location was leaked. HYB has not yet issued an official statement, but fan reactions were swift, with trending hashtags like #RespectJungkook, #JinProtectingJungkook, and #NotLikeThis, making waves on platforms like X and TikTok. Jin's worry reflects long-standing bond and trauma. Fans are calling Jin's message not only protective but deeply emotional, especially given the ongoing discussion surrounding sightseeing behavior. Jin has previously been vocal about the mental health toll such invasions cause. During a past V-Live in 2022, Jin once said, "It's not bravery to chase us through airports. It's fear in disguise. You scare us even when we smile." With Jungkook now alone on a high-stakes solo mission in America, Jin's quiet yet powerful presence behind the scenes has taken center stage. Fans are referring to him as the Guardian Hyung, and with good reason. "He's not there physically," one fan commented, "but he's with Jungkook in every step, in every message, in every heartbeat." Fans rally for peace and privacy. In response to the growing anxiety, ARMY communities around the world began organizing online campaigns urging fans to give Jungkook space. Some US-based fans even coordinated peaceful watch groups, not to crowd him, but to discourage sightseeings from stalking him. "He needs to feel protected, not chased," one New York ARMY said. "We take Jin's message seriously. If Jungkook feels something's off, that means we've failed." Fans also noticed that Jungkook wore the same wristband Jin gave him in 2023, which reads in tiny Hangul, "You are never alone." Jungkook's subtle acknowledgement touches fans worldwide. Later that night, Jungkook posted on Weverse, keeping his words minimal but deeply impactful. "I landed safely. Hyung's words were the first thing I saw. Thank you always." It didn't take long before fans responded with love, gratitude, and heartbreak. Thousands of comments flooded the post, many echoing the same sentiment. "You have us," and "You always have Jin." Final thoughts: a bond beyond borders. This isn't just a story about celebrity arrival schedules, sightseeing controversies, or airport security breaches. It's a story of brotherhood. A bond so strong, it transcends flights, oceans, cameras, and chaos. In a world where fame often isolates, Jin's protective heart reminds us that family, real family, is louder than any screaming crowd. And as Jungkook begins his US journey, one thing is certain. He may be alone in the spotlight, but he is never alone in spirit. As the black-tinted van pulled away from the chaotic scene outside JFK Airport, Jungkook leaned his head against the window, his breath fogging up the glass as flashes from dozens of camera phones danced like lightning on the other side. Fans had gathered despite no official announcement, many holding banners, some even screaming his name in desperation, some in love, others in obsession. The air had been thick with tension. He was used to this, or so everyone thought. But today felt different. The distance from Seoul, the loneliness of a new country, and the suffocating presence of Seokjin's waiting at every possible turn, it all pressed heavily against his chest. Yet in his hand was something steady, something that grounded him in the moment. A single text message, glowing softly on his phone. "Text me the second you feel something's off. Don't hesitate. I'll always answer." It was from Jin, the eldest of BTS, his Hyung, his protector, the one person who always saw through his smiles and knew when he wasn't okay. It had arrived just as Jungkook's plane touched down, as if Jin had been watching the skies the whole time, waiting for that exact moment. Jungkook didn't reply right away. He had stared at it for a moment, letting the words sink into him like warmth in a cold room. Then, as he passed through the terminal flanked by security, he quietly whispered under his breath, "I'm here, Hyung. It's a little crazy already." Only his phone caught the message, but he knew Jin would understand everything those few words carried. Back in Seoul, Jin wasn't asleep. Despite the time difference, he'd been glued to his screen, refreshing flight trackers, checking social media, waiting for news, not from reporters or fans, but from his brother. When the notification came in, Jin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The photos and videos that began flooding the internet moments later only confirmed his worst fears. Fans in restricted areas. Someone recording Jungkook from an elevated window angle. Hotel addresses already being whispered on anonymous message boards. Jin closed his laptop with a hard snap and immediately messaged their management team. "Double his security. And tell him I'm calling soon." The incident reignited conversations around Seokjin culture, not just in South Korea, but globally. This wasn't the first time BTS members had been tracked, followed, and harassed. But this felt different. Jungkook was navigating this alone, at least physically. Fans online began trending hashtags like #ProtectJungkook and #JinIsWatching over the following hours, many expressing heartbreak over the stress visibly etched on Jungkook's face as he exited the airport. His eyes, though hidden partially behind sunglasses, looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from carrying too much emotional weight. Despite the chaos, there was a moment of peace captured by a fan. Jungkook reaching into his jacket pocket as he entered his car and pulling out what looked like a small charm. Eagle-eyed armies recognized it immediately. It was the same lucky charm bracelet Jin had given him before his military enlistment. The charm read in simple Hangul, "You are never alone." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Not on fans. Not on staff. Not on Jungkook himself, who later posted a short but emotionally heavy message on Weverse. "I landed safely. Hyung's words were the first thing I saw. Thank you, always." The message needed no explanation. Thousands of comments poured in, with fans echoing his words, many saying, "Jin's always with you," or "Your Hyung loves you more than we'll ever know." What could have been a triumphant moment of Jungkook beginning a new chapter in America, potentially teasing solo concerts, late-night appearances, or even global campaigns, was now colored by the darker side of fame. And yet, what stood out most wasn't the panic, the photos, or the noise. It was the silence between two brothers. A message sent not for the world to see, but for one heart to hear another. A message filled with quiet worry, with protective love, with something deeper than any spotlight could reveal. In a world that constantly demands pieces of Jungkook, his time, his voice, his presence, Jin had offered him something no one else could: peace. Not the kind found in empty hotel rooms or behind locked doors, but the kind that travels through a phone screen at midnight, the kind that says, "You're not alone, not even now." And for Jungkook, in the middle of a foreign land under the weight of overwhelming fame, that meant everything. Later that night, Jungkook sat alone in his suite. The lights dimmed, the curtains tightly shut. Outside, the city buzzed. New York never slept, but he felt far removed from it all. The day's noise had finally settled into a low hum, yet the echoes of airport chaos still played in his mind. He could still hear the fans screaming his name. He could still feel the camera lenses aimed at his every move. Despite the thick layers of glass and guarded elevators, he didn't feel entirely safe. He found himself scrolling through messages, some from the team, some from fellow members. Taeyong had sent a simple "You good, Kook?" Namjoon followed with a thumbs-up emoji and a link to a cafe nearby that was calm, no paparazzi. But it was Jin's follow-up message that made Jungkook stop. "I'm serious. You don't need to pretend to be okay. If you want to come home, I'll make the call myself." It was blunt. Real. Exactly what Jungkook needed to hear. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to say, "I'm okay." He wanted to say, "Don't worry." But both would be lies. So instead, he just typed, "I'm scared." He didn't hit send immediately. He stared at those two words for what felt like forever, his chest rising and falling slowly, trying to decide if admitting that made him weak. Then his thumb hit the screen. Message sent. The reply came almost instantly. "Good. Because being scared means you're human. And humans deserve space. I'll fix this." Those 5 words, "I'll fix this," felt heavier than anything Jungkook had carried on the plane. He knew Jin couldn't really fix the industry. He couldn't undo the sasaengs or rewrite South Korean copyright laws. He couldn't erase the videos already circulating online, showing Jungkook's overwhelmed expression at the airport. But what Jin could fix, what he always fixed, was the feeling of being alone. And that changed everything. As dawn crept through the skyline and spilled its first light into the suite, Jungkook finally fell asleep. Not because he felt completely safe, but because he felt understood. He had spent years growing into his independence, becoming a global icon, a soloist, a force of his own. But even the strongest need somewhere soft to fall. For Jungkook, that place had always been Jin. Back in Seoul, Jin sat in his living room, phone still in hand, eyes scanning news headlines about Jungkook's arrival. The sasaeng discussion was everywhere now. The fanbase had mobilized, with hashtags demanding stronger protection and a clearer boundary between admiration and obsession. Jin didn't post again that day. He didn't need to. His presence had already spoken louder than any official statement. But what no one knew was that Jin had already made another decision. Quietly, with no fanfare, he had contacted someone at HYB. He wasn't just going to worry from afar. He was going to fly to the US. The flight was booked under an alias. The room next to Jungkook's suite was reserved under a different name. Even his arrival time was off the grid. He wasn't going as Jin of BTS. He was going as a brother. Because sometimes, love doesn't need to shout across a stage or trend on the internet. Sometimes, love shows up quietly at your hotel room door with a knock that says, "You're not alone anymore." And when Jungkook wakes the next morning, heart still fragile, head still heavy, he'll find Jin waiting with warm food, a firm hand on the shoulder, and that same unwavering voice. "You don't have to be strong today. Let me do it for you." In a world that demands so much from stars like Jungkook, sometimes all it takes is one hyung to remind him, "You're more than what they see. You're still someone's little brother. And no matter where you are loved." And so the next morning arrived, not with fanfare, but with softness. The blackout curtains in Jungkook's suite filtered the sunlight into a gentle haze. For a brief moment, there was stillness. No bashing phones. No shouts outside. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the low thud of a knock against the door. He almost didn't move. He thought maybe he had imagined it. But then it came again, steady and familiar. His heart jumped, not in fear, but in disbelief. No way. He hadn't told anyone his room number. The staff had been instructed to keep it under tight wraps. Even the floor had been locked down with additional security. Who would dare? Then a third knock came, followed by a muffled voice. Deep, warm, laced with emotion. "It's me." Jungkook's breath caught in his throat. He walked to the door slowly, barefoot on cool tiles, still in the oversized hoodie he'd fallen asleep in. When he opened it, he didn't say anything at first. Neither did the man standing on the other side. No words were needed, because there was Jin, not in a designer suit or with a camera crew behind him. Just Jin. cap low, hoodie up, holding a paper bag that smelled like kimchi jjigae from home. Jungkook blinked twice, still not believing it. Then Jins simply raised the bag with a sheepish smile. "I figured you didn't eat." A sob nearly escaped Jungkook's throat, but he caught it in a shaky laugh. "Hyung, what are you doing here?" "I told you," Jin said as he stepped inside, placing the food on the small dining table. "You don't have to be strong alone." The sweets suddenly felt warmer, more alive. Jin took off his hoodie, revealing the same gray t-shirt he always wore when he wanted to feel normal. No logos, no attention. Just comfort. He poured soup into a bowl like he'd done 100 times before, like they were back in their shared dorm kitchen instead of a luxury hotel suite on another continent. As they sat down, Jungkook finally allowed himself to fall apart. His hands trembled as he reached for the spoon, his voice unsteady. "Hyung, I don't know how to do this alone." "You're not," Jin said without hesitation. "You never were." And then they ate. Not much was said, but everything was understood. Later that afternoon, HYB's US branch finally issued a statement in response to the airport chaos. It was polished and professional, vowing to investigate the security breach and promising stricter protocols moving forward. But by then, fans had already found something far more meaningful than any corporate press release. A single photo, posted anonymously, began circulating among armies. It showed Jungkook and Jin sitting side by side at the edge of Central Park, hoodies up, drinks in hand. Their faces were turned away from the camera, just two brothers watching the world go by. There were no fans around, no press, no schedule, just a quiet hour of peace in a world that rarely allows it. The photo didn't go viral in the traditional sense. It was shared only in private group chats, on locked accounts, in places where fans understood the sacredness of that moment. They didn't want to exploit it. They wanted to protect it. And that, perhaps, was the most profound shift of all. Jungkook's vulnerability had sparked something deeper, a reflection among fans, a reminder that behind the glamour and music and lights, there are real people who need real care. Jin's arrival had reminded them of that. Not with a press tour, not with a song, but with soup, with silence, with showing up. That night, Jin didn't stay in the room next door. He stayed with Jungkook. They watched old variety shows and laughed at clips they had seen 1,000 times before. Jungkook finally slept with the comfort of someone breathing in the same room, of someone who would stay awake if he couldn't. The next day, Jungkook's demeanor changed. His walk was lighter, his eyes clearer. He stepped into a black car headed for his rehearsal without flinching at the cameras. Not because they weren't still there, they were, but because his anchor had arrived. The tides could crash, but he wouldn't drown. And when the whispers of a secret concert began turning into headlines, when rumors of his appearance on The Tonight Show began flooding Twitter, one thing remained steady behind the noise. Jin. Not as a spokesperson, not as a representative, but as the older brother who refused to let his family face the world alone. Backstage, just minutes before going on set for his surprise TV appearance, Jungkook checked his phone again. A new message had come in. It wasn't long. "Whatever they see on stage tonight, I see the boy who used to sneak snacks into practice. Kill it out there. But remember, when the lights go off, I'm still here." And as the stage manager gave him the final cue, Jungkook smiled, tucked the phone into his pocket, and whispered, "I know, Hyung." The performance would go on to be praised as one of his most raw and electrifying to date. But what the audience didn't see, what no camera caught, was the quiet force behind the curtain, the love that asked for nothing in return, the bond that fame could never fracture. And that is where the real story lives. Not in the applause, not in the headlines, but in the invisible thread between two hearts that, no matter the miles or the madness, always find their way back to each other. Because Jungkook may be the golden magne, a global star walking into uncharted territory. But in Jin's eyes, he'll always be more than that. He'll always be worth protecting. And no matter what city the world throws him into, no matter how loud the noise becomes, he will never, ever be alone. The rain started just as Jungkook stepped back into the hotel that evening. It was light, almost cinematic, droplets tracing gentle rivers down the windows, muffling the outside world into a blur of headlights and city sirens. He didn't reach for an umbrella. He let the water touch his skin, a baptism of sorts. The day had been long. He'd finished rehearsals, completed last-minute fittings, and survived another round of quiet whispers from strangers with cameras. But tonight, unlike the night before, he didn't carry it alone. As he entered the elevator, a staff member offered him a towel. He declined with a small nod. "I'm okay," he said softly, then corrected himself in his thoughts. "I'm better." When the elevator doors slid open to his floor, he walked slowly toward his suite. The hallway was quiet, peaceful, but as he reached his door, he saw something that made his heart stutter. Jin had fallen asleep in the hallway, still wearing his cap, slouched against the wall, phone in hand, half-empty bottle of water by his side. A soft snore escaped him. Jungkook didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes stinging, watching the man who had flown across an ocean to make sure he didn't feel alone for even one night. He crouched next to him and gently nudged his shoulder. Jin stirred, eyes opening halfway. "You idiot," Jungkook whispered with a shaky smile. "You could have waited inside." "I was waiting for the food delivery," Jin mumbled, groggy, but still Jin. Didn't want to fall asleep and miss it. Jungkook helped him up, laughing through a breath that almost turned into a sob. "Hyung, you're unbelievable." Inside the suite, the warmth returned, this time not from soup, but from laughter. They ate late, talked about nothing. Jin made fun of Jungkook's playlist, calling one of his demo songs emo garbage, and Jungkook threatened to release a track titled, "My Hyung is a Clown." Jin said he'd buy the first 10 copies just to leave sarcastic reviews. For the first time in days, Jungkook felt young again, like the kid who used to sneak out of dorm curfew just to watch anime in Jin's room. Like the boy who once cried after their first award win and had been too embarrassed to admit it until Jin threw an arm around his shoulder and said, "It's okay, I cried too. Only mine looked cooler." The next morning, the world woke up to news that Jungkook's performance on The Tonight Show had shattered social media metrics. Millions of views, hashtags trending worldwide, critics calling it a hauntingly beautiful balance between vulnerability and brilliance. But while fans analyzed every second of the performance, Jungkook was off the grid. He and Jin had slipped out early, disguised in caps and masks, walking quietly through a sleepy New York street. No entourage, no cameras. Just the two of them, blending into the city, like they were nobodies again. They went to a small diner Jin had bookmarked the night before. Eggs, toast, American coffee that Jin said tasted like regret. They talked about the future. Not in the way idols are supposed to, plans, releases, tour dates, but real futures. "Do you ever think of quitting?" Jungkook asked, voice low. Jin didn't answer right away. He chewed slowly, then said, "All the time. But then I remember why I started." Jungkook stared at him. "And why did you?" Jin shrugged. "Because I wanted to matter to someone." And in that moment, Jungkook realized he already had. Over and over again. They didn't stay long. The world couldn't be kept waiting. By noon, Jin was scheduled to return to Seoul. No one would know he had come at all. The alias on the plane manifest would remain just a name. No selfies. No press. Just presence. At the airport, they hugged quietly near the VIP gate. No dramatic goodbyes. Just a simple, eat something real later, and don't be late to soundcheck. Jungkook held on a second longer, whispered against Jin's shoulder. "Thanks for saving me again." Jin pulled back, looked him in the eye. "I didn't save you. I reminded you you're worth saving." When Jin boarded the plane, he didn't check his phone for hours. He didn't have to. The mission was complete. Meanwhile, Jungkook walked into his next rehearsal with a posture more solid, more sure. Not because the world had become easier, but because he was no longer bearing its weight alone. By evening, armies began to notice a shift in tone on Jungkook's Weverse posts. Less cryptic, less heavy. Just a few simple lines. "Had real food today. Real laughs too." And beneath that, "You were right, Hyung. I'm not alone." The message spread fast, not just among BTS fans, but across fandom communities who understood what it meant to really show up for someone. Not in comments, not in posts, but in person, in silence, in love. Later that week, The Tonight Show released unseen behind-the-scenes footage of Jungkook's visit. In one frame, as Jungkook prepared to walk on stage, someone from production asked, "Any last words before you perform?" Jungkook looked at the camera for a beat and then smiled. "Yeah, I've got someone who's waiting for me back home. I'll make him proud." The audience cheered. The internet broke. But the real magic had happened long before that. In a hotel hallway, in the steam of hot soup, in a shared laugh over bitter coffee, in a single knock on the door. Because in the end, the strongest kind of love doesn't announce itself. It just shows up. Quiet, steady, unshakable, like Jin, like family, like home.